Hello and welcome. My name is Konrad Gorliński, and you're watching Press Corner here on TVP World. It's our weekly Sunday chat about the past week's key events with our colleagues in the media here in the heart of Europe. Well, joining us today are my guests. First, Aleksander Papko, political scientist and journalist at Bielsat. We've got Mateusz Mazzini, he's a journalist at Gazeta Wyborcza. And we've got Jakub Biernat, who's also a journalist at Bielsat. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us this Sunday morning. And I know it's a big sacrifice, so it's very, very much appreciated. Well, we've had a huge week in the news, I think, and especially with the news that came out yesterday from Washington, D.C. with the bills that were passed by the House. So let's start with that story. The U.S. House of Representatives has approved a long-stalled aid package valued at nearly $100 billion. It includes over $60 billion of aid for Ukraine, which has been the most contentious issue in U.S.-Ukraine relations for some months now.
After months of delays, a $95 billion aid package for Ukraine and Israel was passed by the U.S. House of Representatives. The bill received broad bipartisan support, with 311 lawmakers voting for and only 112 against.
This is a moment where the Congress is required to stand up for democracy, freedom, and truth, and push back against aggression.
This foreign aid bill has been a matter of heated debate for months now, both in the United States and abroad. The question of providing additional assistance to Ukraine, among other key issues, emerged in October when the White House submitted its request for supplemental national security funding. In recent months, President Biden has emphasized the importance of increasing the support for the war-ravaged Ukraine, calling it a matter of national security and cautioning against territorial concessions to Russia. Of the $95 billion, $61 billion has been earmarked for Ukraine, with much of the funds going towards replenishing American munitions. The financial aid, however, also opens the door to future U.S. military transfers to Ukraine, including new weapon systems coming directly from U.S. defense contractors. The delayed vote has also spelled uncertainty in Ukraine. The country's shortage of munitions and supplies has led Ukrainian troops to ration what they have left. At the same time, the remaining defenses are overwhelmed by constant Russian attacks, many aimed at power stations. But it's not only Ukraine that will benefit from the funds. A portion is also allocated for Israel to replenish its military supplies and missile defense.
All right, gentlemen, so huge news for Ukraine. We waited for this since October, really, as it's been almost 6 months. How important is this news for the Ukrainian war effort? Maybe let's start with you, Aleksander.
I believe this is crucial decision which is taken by the U.S. Congress, so it will be the vote in the Senate, but it's pretty much decided. The problem is not in the money, because the money is available in the European Union as well, and almost half of the war spending of Ukraine, or spending in wartime, is covered by the European Union, but the European Union can only cover the civilian expenses, the support for the state apparatus, but the European Union cannot provide hardware. Tanks, missiles, firearms, and the only producer of there are few producers of military hardware in the Western world, and the biggest among them are the United States, and only them can give tanks to the Ukrainian army to defend itself.
That's right. So it's for the United States also. It's not pure altruism here. A lot of this money will end up will stay in the U.S. To pump up its economy, to pump up its military-industrial complex, etc. So this isn't pure altruism here from the U.S. To the Ukraine. What do you say about that?
Certainly not, but I think it's equally important, but obviously for different reasons, for Ukraine as it is for American domestic politics, because we've said this particular aid package has been stuck in Congress since October. But in the long term, Donald Trump has had his way with Congress for 18 months. It was since January 2023, when representatives took over control in the House of Representatives, when the aid of American government towards Ukraine pretty much stalled or stopped entirely. So the big question is, what is actually going on the inside of the Republican Party? Is there a rebellion? Is there really a point in which they starting to contest Donald Trump's foreign policy decisions? There are some theories already brewing around the American press that maybe the Republican traditional, so to speak, establishment is not particularly happy with this isolationist pursuit that Donald Trump is putting forward as his campaign offer. And I think this is a major blow for the Trumpian part of the Republican Party right now. We already see his reaction. He's trying to jump on the winning side. He published an entry on this freakish frenzy social media of his platform that he owns when he wrote, "This is fundamentally more important." So Ukraine is fundamentally more important for the security of Europe, but it's also important for us, which is a pivot.
It is a pivot, isn't it? He didn't say those words before.
He never said those words, and I think we need to state it clear. I think we're far enough in the presidential campaign in the United States to actually state it. Donald Trump is not a pro-Ukrainian candidate. He made it obvious and clear since the very beginning. If you want to remain loyal to me within the Republican Party, you have to stay against or away from any support to Ukraine. Otherwise, you're going to have a primary rival. And these are words that require no further interpretation. So something changed, something shifted in the Republican Party. And I think the days and weeks to come will show what that means exactly in the longer term.
Perhaps he just took advice from CIA Director William Burns, who said that this is an existential issue for Ukraine. I know that one of you have an opinion on that, is because a lot of people are saying, well, perhaps this isn't based on real analysis. This was William Burns just signaling to U.S. lawmakers, hey guys, listen, we got to get this through. But it's not that serious that Ukraine will fall by end of year, as he said. But perhaps he is right. Perhaps this is based on real analysis on the battlefield.
In the recent years, the CIA is changing its public policy. They're giving out the information which otherwise would be kept secret in order to in order to influence the policymakers and the general public. It was the case with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because they warned about the preparation and they warned about the imminent attack. The recent terrorist attacks in Russia also were announced by Western secret services, and probably this is not a simple publicity or PR movement from the CIA. The problem is that the Ukrainian army does not have enough people and enough hardware to regain the territory, and if the army does not have so much weapons, they can only freeze the conflict and just start negotiation about the peace, which will not be accepted within Ukraine in the West, and the peace which will the armistice which will not give the peace for the continent.
All right. Well, one good thing that's coming out of this is that it seems that talk of some kind of deal with Russia, that's off the table. Would you agree?
For now, it seems to be off the table, but I think we need to be careful and actually draw a distinction between Congress Republicans and Donald Trump himself, because you've mentioned William Burns. I'm not entirely sure that Donald Trump would listen to anybody's advice on the basis of facts. He's not that kind of a politician. He proved that countless times during his first presidency, that he doesn't really rely on expertise. He doesn't value expertise in the first place. So I think that if Burns had a direct conversation with anybody within the Republican Party. That was much more directed at Congress, at, as I said, the old-fashioned, so to speak, Republican establishment. And I think there's one more thing that we cannot forget in the context of the vote from yesterday, that this is an aid package that's tied also to Taiwan and Israel. Okay, it's almost $100 billion for the three countries combined. And maybe, given the reactions of the House Republicans to the recent strike of the Israeli Defense Forces into Iran, maybe the escalation in the Middle East, the growing threat of Iran, helped to persuade Republicans to see this axis of evil, so to speak, as moving in the same direction. So they might be concerned more about Israel than they are about Ukraine. But ultimately, at the end of the day, that makes no difference because the aid package is tied to one another. So the money is out there.
Well, sort of. I mean, they voted on them all separately. But I wonder, now that we're talking about media and propaganda, they did sneak into the package, the sanctions package, sanctions against China, Russia, and Iran. They snuck in a ban on Tik Tok. Well, it's not an outright ban. The Chinese have the opportunity to sell their American operations in the United States. If they don't, well, then there will be a ban. I wonder what you guys feel as journalists. What kind of precedent does this set?
I guess it's very obvious because TikTok is a powerful instrument of not only of propaganda, but also of gathering data, among the Westerners, the Chinese government learning how to understand the West by using TikTok. So this is very important to cut this source of information from Chinese, because maybe they, because we are democratic worlds, they knew more than we know about China,
them. Yeah.
About them, and this is the problem.
That's right, because not only is TikTok, I mean, it's feeding us information, but TikTok itself also collects a lot of information, doesn't it? Yeah. I mean, I think they listen to everything that we do. They follow us where we go.
They learn our behavioral patterns.
They learn our behavioral patterns.
They can teach also artificial intelligence, which is also crucial in modern world.
That's right. And and a final thing, I wonder here, like when we're looking at this, we're looking at all these bills, seeing what's happening in the world. Do you feel that we're going back in time? Sort of, are we back in the 80s? Are we back in the Cold War?
We forgot about one very important thing here. It's not only the military assistance package, but also the freezing of Russian assets, which is. And we know that Europe and Great Britain is very reluctant to take Russian assets that are frozen now, and America is not.
America, yes, so in this sanctions bill that went through.
This is big precedent, and the Russians are very angry about that because they are losing their money, and their money goes to Ukraine at the end of the day. So we should also, stress this this fact.
The reaction of Dmitry Peskov, who is a press secretary of Vladimir Putin, was not on the providing American military aid, so hardware, as I said, to Ukraine, but he reacted violently on the confiscation of Russian assets. It was not only the freeze of assets, but the confiscation. Which
that's
is
right.
Another step. And now in the European Union, there is a debate about possible also confiscation, and the Americans have done the first step, and as it usually is in the sanction world, the second step will be done probably by the European Union.
That's right, and we're looking at huge numbers. Do we know exactly these assets, at least the ones that are allocated in the United States? Who do they belong to? I know that there are a lot of assets from the central bank. A lot of people saying, "Well, you're taking money away from pensioners in Russia. Is this fair? Is this not fair?" But how much of that money really belongs to pensioners, and how much of it belongs to oligarchs?
You know, I don't know the numbers of the assets, but in this case, we should understand that at the same time, Russia is robbing foreign companies. They are taking assets that were invested in Russia for very huge companies like McDonald's, like Danone, like Renault. They are selling. They are forced to sell the whole factories for $1, for example. So now, in this case, I don't understand this reluctance of the West. Part of the West.
That's right. It evens out in the
same,
end.
You know, for Russia.
For once, it does even out, because even kind of making the parallel to this discussion about Tik Tok, this is an inherent tension between the Western world and non-democratic party countries. They're not playing by the rules. Why should the West? There was this debate about banning TikTok as an infringement to freedom of speech. I wonder if a total ban of TikTok is ever going to come to the European Union, and how this is going to play out with the far-right parties, because we know that the radical right groupings in Europe are infinitely more active and infinitely more efficient on TikTok than, for instance, left-wing groups in the European Parliament. And there's a lot of talk that this is infringement of the freedom of speech or right to information and whatnot. But then we know what happens with any data entries that go into Chinese People's Republic. They're fed into this insane machinery of the Chinese Communist Party. So we're banning essentially a non-democratic country for having information they should never have. And in the exact same instant, we're banning an authoritarian regime of Vladimir Putin, to say the least, from having access to the money that they have robbed from other countries themselves anyway, right? So I don't see that there is an imbalance here.
Yeah, but the problem is that in the rule of law. So the Western world is the society based on rules.
Based on principles. If they're using these principles against us.
But yeah, of course, it's aucune liberté pour les ennemis de la liberté. So no freedom for the enemy of freedom, as it was in the French Revolution. But it was not the case of rule of law in this situation. So the problem with the European Union in particular is that the one can freeze the assets, but the questions of property and giving up some property or selling it to other entities is that it should be a court decision, and every non-lawful decision can be later on discussed in the court. So it opens the door for litigation for hundreds of years. Exactly. And how to avoid this? How to make it legal? How to make it non-contradictional? And how to make it consistent with the rule of law and the democratic standards. It's very important for the very essence of life in the European Union. So Russia has become a dictatorship because there is no rule of law and independent courts in Russia. So how not to repeat this path of Kremlin?
That's right. But unfortunately, a lot of times when you fight, you have to fight fire with fire. So we're in a very difficult position here in Europe, wouldn't you agree? And this leads me back to the question I had earlier, is are we back in a Cold War? Do we just have to cut out certain people from our sphere of actions completely? Cut them out from our sphere.
I think it's good to quote the famous Lenin quote, or Marx. I'm not sure that we can sell capitalists a rope that they hang themselves with it. So I think this is the time to see that investing in a non-democratic country is a big threat, because this money goes back in military hardware to attack other countries. So, and we have more problems with it. Now we see it within Russia in full scale, that what happened with all of the money that goes from West, from Germany, for example, how they create huge savings of funds that are sponsor war. But we have also China, and we see that also West invested huge money there. And we are not sure what will happen next with...
That's right. A lot of money was made, but was it worth it? A lot of money might be lost later on the road.
Yeah. And also the question of data transfer. It's estimated that China spends on gets from the infringement of intellectual rights more money than it spends of R&D. So the espionage, technical espionage, commercial espionage of China is giving them more resources than they invest in the economic development in new technology, what is shocking. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not surprised. I remember being in China still in the early 2000s. I mean, I bought a pair of Reeboks for 50 cents. I mean, and they look like Reebok. Well, they were Reeboks, basically just taken from the Reebok factory and then sold off. I mean, I'm not surprised. And is this, like, what is the issue here? It's a lack of long-term thinking, isn't it? It's a quest for instant gratification. Is that the biggest issue that we've fallen into? I mean,
to a certain extent, I think that one thing that you guys mentioned that is very important in this context is this completely different paradigm of governing the economy of the United States, be it the European Union and China. You're absolutely right to point out that the Chinese economic development is done on the back of the West, and there's no sugarcoating it. Let's see what the Americans did already a couple of years ago with Chinese students being essentially banned from entering computer science departments at top universities across the United States. We say that migration and intellectual diasporas build the economic success of the West. We have huge groups of younger people, myself included, who went to study abroad, and a lot of them remain in the UK and in the US. The Chinese never did that. The Chinese always went there, studied, took the research, took the abilities, went back to China, were very, very often forced to go back.
They were forced to
go back to China because of the huge level of debt that they were forced to take against the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese state. But this built this intellectual powerhouse that wasn't exactly created, built and bred in China itself. It is done very much on the back of Western traditional institutions, Western R&D, Western liberties as well, meaning the liberty to go to a different country to study, to get experience, to get training, and then coming back. So I think that China owes the West quite a significant part of its own economic and technological development.
That's right. And in terms of this Chinese espionage, I saw a very interesting statistic recently. There's been a huge uptick in the number of Chinese wives married to American servicemen. A very interesting fact there. So the cynicism goes a lot farther there. Yeah.
We can go back to the Cold War and this Stasi and Soviet Union honey traps. So
exactly, the honey trap. It's always there. All right. Well, let's move a little bit more to the European Union. Let's see what's going on there. A meeting of the European Council earlier this week addressed two pressing issues, of course, Russia's war in Ukraine, as well as escalating Middle East tensions. Now, the fragile state of global security has also led EU leaders backing new sanctions against Iran, and in a response to the country's growing hostility. Let's take a look at some details.
This month, EU leaders have been focusing on finding an appropriate response to tensions soaring in the Middle East. The latest meeting of the European Council addressed just that, among other topics. Tehran's most recent attack on Israel drew international condemnation. EU leaders reaffirmed their commitment to Israel's security and called for restraint on both sides, while introducing decisive measures.
We condemn this attack launched by Iran against Israel. We have decided to put in place sanctions against Iran. This is a clear signal that we want to send.
The EU Council also set time aside to discuss Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine. Kyiv's continued need for military aid was reiterated by President Zelensky, who joined the meeting by video link.
Of course, the situation is very, very grave, and we have to send them what they ask, which is ammunition and air defense. But there's still, I mean, it's a very worrying situation on the ground. We just can't afford that Ukraine is losing the war. Otherwise, the whole security situation in Europe is in grave danger.
This was also the last meeting of the European Council before the European Parliament elections later this year. The upcoming vote is more than just an exercise in democracy. It will shape the EU's future. The results will determine the political composition of the European Parliament and influence the appointment of the new European Commission.
All right, gentlemen. So yeah, big meetings happening as well in the European Union, and it looks like well, a lot of papers are saying that the Middle East crisis is starting to overshadow the Ukraine crisis, and also overshadowing key decisions that need to be made in the European Union. Any comments on this?
I have one comment. You know, this American stalemate, I mean, you know, not passing the bill for months gave the stimulus for the European Union to rush, which is a good thing because Germany had to send more ammunition, send more hardware to Ukraine. Also, we have to remember about the Czech initiative of purchasing ammunition for Ukraine. So it was a good thing for Ukraine in the end because the assistance of European Union helps Ukraine at the time when America was
certainly,
away.
yeah, America's like the big brother, and they were just counting, oh, the big brother will take care of it, no big deal. But they had to say, oh, well, we have to do
European
something.
Union was for sure frightened by the position of America, and it gave new power for European Union to help. So this is a good thing.
It is a good thing. You agree?
It is a coming-of-age moment for the European Union geopolitically, so to speak, because we've never had as many simultaneous conflicts on the outskirts, on the verges of the European continent, at least not in the recent history. But I think the European Union, at least from a foreign policy point of view, finds itself in this very paradoxical moment that on the one hand, we're growing more aware of what Jakob was mentioning before, that we need to be able to be dealing with those problems on our own. But yet, even though we are aware of that fact in the context of Ukraine, we still don't seem to be rushing to make individual decisions on behalf of the European Union in the context of the Middle Eastern crisis. Because look what happened right after the recent escalations. Last weekend, we had this Iranian attack into the Israeli territories. Now we have a retaliation. And what is the European Union doing? The very first thing that the European leaders have done is wait for the White House to comment, right? And I'm going to actually pose maybe a provocative question here, because that's a question that I struggle with. Can anybody tell me right now what the overall direction of foreign policy of the European Union towards the Middle East is? Is Josep Borrell or any other European Union servant, I'm not saying leaders of individual countries, because this is right and center, pretty much clear. We have had Spaniards declaring move to declare Palestine a sovereign country in a matter of months. I know Belgians are trying to do the same by, I think, July or June. But what is the European Union thinking of doing in the context of Middle East? And also, does anybody care anymore? Like, is anybody actually waiting for the European Union to assume a position on this? Or is everybody already kind of the opinion that this is going to end up in a bilateral conversation between Netanyahu and whoever remains in the White House or comes back to the White House after November?
Gentlemen?
Okay, it's a difficult question, really, because we do not hear the voice of the European Union, or we do not see the European Union taken into account during the negotiation on the Middle East. But at the same time, we see the difficulties of the European Union to deal with the Ukrainian crisis, and probably also this influences the overall position of the European Union in the whole Western world. As I said, this is a problem of military hardware. So the European Union has money and gives this money to Ukraine, but they can do nothing with the hard open invasion of Russia into Ukraine, and also like the question of military production. In recent decades, the number of tanks produced in Europe was measured by dozens. In the United States, I believe there are several hundreds of tanks produced every year, while during these 2 years of war, Russia lost in Ukraine 3,000 tanks. So 3,000 tanks and other heavy machinery. there is no military production on the European soil. There are difficulties with starting this production. One of the Belgian generals, Mark Thies, I believe his name is pronounced like this, said that it will take about 5-7 years to restore the
production capacity.
The production capacities, and we see the initiative of France, which are afraid of these discussions in the U.S. that the European security is depending on the discussion in the White House. So they're obviously afraid, and they're trying to be the leaders of in the military spheres of the European Union. But do they have resources? Do they have money and do they have the political will to speed up the military production?
That's right. And speaking of political will, and speaking of divisions within Europe itself, and just the state of democracy within Europe itself, there was a very curious event that happened in Brussels just a few days ago during the Council of Europe. There was a conservative meeting there. Let's take a look at that. A recent conference in Brussels sparked international debate. Local police were ordered to shut down the meeting of right-wing politicians after the city's mayor deemed it a public security threat. What followed were accusations of stifling free speech. Let's take a look.
The organizers of an international right-wing conference in Brussels were barely given the green light to hold a second day of talks when the local mayor imposed a ban just a few hours into the event.
But what's happened here is now on the stage of where there is global media, we can see that legally held opinions from people who are going to win national elections is no longer acceptable here in Brussels, the home of globalism.
The conference, which gathered right-wing politicians such as Nigel Farage and Viktor Orban, made headlines after a failed attempt to shut it down. The British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak called the move extremely disturbing and damaging to free speech and democracy as a result. The National Conservatism Conference is a global movement embracing what it describes as traditional values. Despite some of its attendees being accused of anti-gay and anti-abortion views, they argued their right to free speech. Just outside the venue, a group of protesters gathered to protest against the controversial meeting. However, no scuffles or injuries were reported by police.
All right, gentlemen. I'm no fan of a lot of the figures there, but at the same time, I am a free speech purist. I think that in order for a democracy to thrive, free speech is essential. What's your take on this whole event there?
Of course, from my point of view, it was a mistake because, it's not a crime to be anti-abortionist or to be against the promotion of the LGBT, ideology, or how we call it, But of course, so these people, they have right to speak and to talk. But of course, we should understand from other point of view that the same agenda is promoted by Russia, of course. And we lastly. Washington Post, I guess, published a report of one of the Secret Service agency of the Russian foreign policy secret amendment to the official foreign policy, and they are stated openly that Russia should explore the division within the
well, it's certainly done more than explored it.
Within the public opinion of the West, and promote the most radical wings of it. During the communist time, they were dealing with the, of course, left side of the political arena. Now they are miraculously switched to the right. So. Mm-hmm. Of course,
very often targeting the exact same people.
Yeah.
Right?
Of course, they have right to speak, but also we have to know their connections. And in many we remember this Russian oligarch Malofeev, who is running the Tsargrad TV in Russia, very conservative, very orthodox, very nationalist television and portals in Russia. And at the same time, he's trying to make a network of people working for to divide, public opinion in Europe. So basically, okay, you have right to talk about these things in Europe freely, but at the same time, you want to know the.
Isn't that our job? Isn't that our job as journalists?
It is very much, but also, as much as it sounds controversial, we're talking about soaring divisions in the public opinion in the West. What makes the Western public opinion is the very fact that it is divided, right? Because it has to be incoherent, it has to be encompassing a number of different ideological fronts. And I'm of the opinion, very much like you, that they want to speak, let them speak, but someone else wants to protest that speech, let them protest, and this is how we should work.
Peacefully, though.
Peacefully, of course, and within the confines of rule of law, democracy, freedom of speech. But this is what makes essentially the post-Enlightenment Western world possible. And I think this is very much shot in the foot, because that only fuels the arguments that people like Viktor Orban or Nigel Farage.
Exactly, that fuels their arguments.
Have been putting forward for the last years. And in order to kind of give you a piece of anecdotal evidence very quickly, I've once spent 30 minutes one-on-one with the foreign press secretary of Orban's administration, Zoltan Kovac, because Orban has divided his press corps into two different streams, one for the domestic press, the other for the international one. And I was there for half an hour asking him all the typical Western journalist questions, like why do you infringe on the rule of law? Why do you violate your own constitution? Why do you block foreign investment? Why did you kick out this Central European University out of Vienna? And he only ever had one answer. You read too much Western media, and Western media does not understand us because we're different, we're Hungarian, nobody actually speaks Hungarian outside of Europe. If you could, you would understand us. And that's only proof to this theory. They would tell the European Union, doesn't want us, doesn't understand it, doesn't respect our values. Why should we care? Why should we try to befriend them if they're hostile to our values? Which only pushes them...
And this proves it.
Pushes them further away on the kind of external orbit of the European Union. And we shouldn't forget that we still have Hungary inside the European Union, inside NATO. We have the principle of unanimity in both of these institutions. It's enough that Orban blocks one crucial vote. And he did that countless times already in the past. And all of strategic goals for both of these institutions are derailed momentarily. So this needs to be...
Dialogue and compromise, that's what's necessary. Unfortunately, it takes a long time. We want to get things done fast, but unfortunately, in our system, that's what has to be done. It takes a bit longer. All right. Now, we have to move back to the Middle East, the situation in the Middle East. We had a lot of things happening during the week in the Middle East. And we actually have another guest that's going to join us very shortly. But let's take a quick look. Calls for restraint echoed around the globe this week, of course, following renewed tensions between Israel and Iran. Iran's attack on Iranian territory, which Israeli officials have yet to publicly acknowledge, marked the latest stage of the confrontation. Here are some of the details.
Since the start of the month, tensions between Israel and Iran have been at an all-time high. Most recently, Israel was to launch a missile into Iran in the early hours of Friday. Israeli authorities, however, are yet to take responsibility for the strike. What also remains a mystery is the scale of the attack. While the Iranian state media has downplayed the event, it's known that the main target was the central province of Isfahan. This area is not only famous for its heritage sites, but it's also home to a major airbase, which was used during Iran's own attack on Israel earlier in the month. Still, Israel's response was undoubtedly limited. According to international observers, this retaliatory strike was not meant to showcase Israel's lust for vengeance, but instead simply highlight its ability to strike inside Iran. Both sides have been tight-lipped about the most recent escalation. However, what started with Israel attacking an Iranian consulate in Damascus has clearly brought the shadow war between the rivals into the light of day. It's also prompted Iran to launch its first attack on Israel from its own territory, with over 300 drones and cruise missiles. Meanwhile, on the other side of the globe, Israel's ally, the United States, has since day one reiterated that it would not participate in this flare-up. It has, however, vowed unwavering support to Israel. Tensions between Israel and Iran have been ongoing for years, with both countries viewing each other as significant threats. For now, both Iran and Israel seem to have averted an all-out war, but the situation remains tense. The recent flare-up follows rising hostility over the last 2 years as Iran has ramped up its nuclear program, which Israel staunchly opposes. The Middle East is on edge, and the risk of further conflict remains high.
All right. Well, as I mentioned, to start us off on this topic, we have a new guest. Łukasz Przybyszewski is an expert on Middle Eastern affairs and Iran from the Abhasid Foundation Fund. Sir, thanks for joining us.
Good day.
All right. Very difficult to figure out what's happening here. I mean, the first 2 stages, okay, I understand. So a consulate in Damascus was attacked by Israel, Iran responding. But then the response from Israel, Israel isn't admitting to it. Iran says that nothing happened. What's going on here? If you could clear that up first.
Sure. So basically, we all know that every country in the Middle East now wants to avoid further escalation because this could lead to a regional war, etc. So what we have now is a sabotage attack, which took place in Iran, in Isfahan, at the H. Shekori base, military base next to the international airport in Isfahan. And first we had a huge hype about Israeli jets which fired missiles. Those missiles were supposedly hitting the S-300 battery that's stationed there. But even the first radar pictures have shown that there are no craters. So it's highly unlikely that those were missiles. So the version which was published by the Iranian media and the government is more accurate. So there was a group which has used drones to attack this S-300 battery. So that's most likely what happened. The radar is probably damaged. Probably there was a small fire, it was contained, and that's basically it. Israel
That's basically it. And do we know where these drones came from? Do they come from Israel?
No. Those were small drones. You could deliver pizza with those.
All right.
So now Israel will not admit because that's a covered up. Yeah. And most likely not even by Israeli officers, but rather local agents who are simply conducting such strikes on a regular basis in Isfahan, especially in Isfahan, because Isfahan is pretty much known as the aerospace research development center, basically. Yeah.
That's right, and they have the nuclear program located around there as well, right?
In Natanz, there's one of the research centers, of course, and that's also a likely target if an all-out war would break out. Yeah. But for now on, that's it. That's not the retaliation, the counter-strike everyone was expecting, not wanting, but expecting, yeah.
That's right, because this happened just a few hours after the Iranian foreign minister on CNN warned Israel that should they retaliate, they would receive a swift response.
Even a maximum response, because at the beginning it was like it would be tenfold. Yeah? But now, when they realize that Israel really wants to somehow retaliate, they just said there will be no limits. So I guess for now on, Israel is waiting. Perhaps they will wait for a better occasion to do the counterattack. We'll see. Perhaps they will accept just the situation as it is. But if so, then a lot of media coverage would be needed to generate a narrative that would show that it's Israel who has the upper hand and not Iran. From now on, from a logical and fact-based approach, it's Iran who has still the upper hand.
All right. I wonder if you guys have any opinions here. But I wonder, let's look at who benefits. I mean, who benefits from increased tensions between Israel and Iran? Do you guys have any theories?
In the longer picture, I think it's pretty obvious. It's Russia and China because they're moving away the West's attention from Ukraine. obviously there's that question kind of hanging up in the air: is America a big enough superpower still to be able to afford managing, even diplomatically, politically, two conflicts at once? And I think the recent vote in the Senate proved that there are some shifts going on inside the Republican Party, because we've unlocked the aid to Ukraine. But also, the big question that I'm particularly interested in is anybody actually able from the outside to anyhow influence Netanyahu's opinions? Because right after the strike last weekend, when Iranians attacked into the Israeli territory, there was this conversation on the phone between Biden and Netanyahu, and Biden famously said to him, "You got to win, take that win, and avoid further escalation." And we had the Brits coming to aid the Israelis, we had the French, we had the Jordanians, who made a very important political commitment here to actually declare which side they're siding on. And the question is, in the wake of first losing a lot of international support on the international stage because of what's happening in Gaza, and now regaining parts of it because the Iranians attacked him, will Netanyahu want to anger the very people that came to his defense by escalating that game with Iran further?
It's a very interesting story. I wish we had more time. We've reached the end. Hopefully, we'll make this program even longer. This is my favorite program. Gentlemen, thank you all for taking the time to join us on this Sunday afternoon, well, morning. Thank you again. And thank you for joining us here on Press Corner. Please join us again at the same time next Sunday.